A school lockdown can turn an ordinary day into a nightmare in seconds. Doors lock, lights go out, and suddenly nobody knows what's happening. Tonight, you'll hear 3 disturbing school lockdown stories that students still can't explain. In September 2013, 16-year-old Tyler was sitting in his second-period history class at a public high school in Ohio. The lesson had barely begun when the classroom loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention staff and students. This is a lockdown. Secure your rooms immediately." The room fell silent. Everyone stared at each other. At first, Tyler assumed it was another drill. Then he heard police sirens outside. The teacher immediately locked the classroom door, covered the narrow window, switched off the lights, and told everyone to get out of sight. Students rushed toward the back corner of the room. Tyler squeezed himself between 2 filing cabinets. A girl nearby was quietly crying. Someone else was whispering a prayer. Nobody knew what was happening. Minutes passed. The silence became unbearable. Then Tyler heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured, deliberate. At first they sounded distant. Then they grew closer and closer until they stopped directly outside their classroom door. Every student froze. The footsteps didn't move. Whoever was outside was standing perfectly still, listening. Then the doorknob slowly turned. Once, it stopped. A few seconds later, it turned again. This time longer, as if the person was trying to determine whether the door was locked. The teacher quietly reached for the baseball bat she kept beside her desk. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Then came 3 soft knocks. Knock, knock, knock. The sound wasn't aggressive. It wasn't desperate. It sounded calm, almost polite. A man's voice spoke from the hallway. "I know you're in there." Several students immediately started crying. Nobody answered. The voice spoke again. "Open the door." Tyler felt his stomach drop. The room remained silent. For nearly 30 seconds, nobody heard anything. Then the footsteps slowly walked away. The entire class sat frozen. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Tyler finally started convincing himself the
person had moved on. That's when the footsteps returned. This time there was no knocking, no voice, no attempt to open the door. The person simply stopped outside the classroom again, waiting. The silence felt worse than before. It lasted nearly a minute. Then the footsteps disappeared for good. 2 hours later, the lockdown was lifted. Police escorted students from the building while officers searched every hallway and classroom. Later that afternoon, investigators revealed that a man had entered the school through an unlocked service entrance. He had spent over an hour wandering inside the building before staff noticed him. But the strangest discovery came from the security footage. The man had stopped outside Tyler's classroom multiple times throughout the morning. Each time, he remained there for several seconds before moving on. As officers reviewed the footage frame by frame, they noticed something unsettling. Whenever he stood outside that classroom door, he would lean forward slightly, as if he were trying to listen to something inside. The cameras had no audio. Nobody ever learned what he was saying, or why he kept returning to that specific room.
In November 2008, Emma was a sophomore at a high school in Michigan. She first noticed something was wrong during lunch. 3 police officers suddenly ran past the cafeteria windows. Students immediately began looking around. Nobody knew what was happening. A few minutes later, the announcement came over the loudspeaker. "Attention staff and students. This is a lockdown. Secure your rooms immediately." Conversations stopped. Teachers rushed students into nearby classrooms. Doors were locked. Blinds were closed. Lights were switched off. Within minutes, the entire school was silent. Emma and several other students sat on the floor near the back of a classroom. Rumors spread quickly. Someone claimed an intruder had entered the building. Another student said police were searching for a weapon. Nobody knew what to believe. As the lockdown continued, Emma remembered something strange. Earlier that morning, she had seen a senior named Ryan standing alone near the cafeteria entrance. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't using his phone. He was simply staring toward the second-floor hallway. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. Now she couldn't stop thinking about it. Nearly an hour passed. Then several police officers entered the classroom. Their expressions were serious. One officer began checking attendance records against a printed list. When he reached one name, he paused. Ryan. Teachers assumed he was absent. But according to school records, Ryan had entered the building that morning. Security footage confirmed it. Cameras showed him walking through the main entrance shortly before first period. After that, he seemed to disappear. Completely. Police searched classrooms, storage closets, bathrooms, maintenance areas. Nothing. Hours passed. The lockdown remained in effect. Students became restless. Teachers grew increasingly nervous. Then officers finally found him. Ryan had been hiding inside a locked maintenance room behind the gym. What police discovered inside immediately raised more questions. The room contained detailed maps of the school, teacher schedules, student photographs, handwritten notes, pages and pages of them. Some described classroom routines. Others listed times when certain hallways were usually empty. Investigators spent hours removing boxes of material from the room. As students were finally released that evening, rumors spread throughout the parking lot. Nobody seemed to know exactly what had been found. Several weeks later, Emma learned something that stayed with her for years. Among the photographs recovered from the maintenance room was a picture of her. At first, that didn't seem unusual. Many students' photos had been collected, but there was something different about hers. Unlike the others, it hadn't come from a yearbook. It had been taken through a classroom window. The timestamp showed it was taken the same morning as the lockdown. Police never determined why Ryan had collected the photographs. He refused to answer questions. He never explained the notes. And he never explained why he had a recent photograph of Emma. Even years later, she still wonders whether the lockdown interrupted whatever he had planned that day. In October 1999, 15-year-old Chloe attended a small high school in Pennsylvania. One rainy afternoon, an emergency lockdown was suddenly announced over the school intercom. The message was brief. Teachers, secure your classrooms immediately. Within seconds, students were rushing away from windows. Doors were locked. Blinds were pulled shut wherever possible. Nobody was told what was happening. Nobody knew why the school had gone into lockdown. Chloe's classroom grew quiet. The lights were turned off. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the windows. For the first few minutes, students whispered theories. Some thought it was a drill. Others weren't so sure. As time passed, the room became increasingly silent. Nobody wanted to speak above a whisper. The uncertainty was making everyone nervous. About 30 minutes into the lockdown, a loud tapping sound suddenly came from somewhere near the windows. Several students jumped. The teacher looked up immediately. The room went silent again. A few seconds later, the sound stopped. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The rain continued. A few minutes later, Chloe thought she saw movement near the edge of the window. At first, she assumed it was just a reflection. She looked away. Then she saw it again. Something had moved outside. This time she kept staring. And that's when she saw the face. A person was standing outside the second-floor classroom window, watching. The figure wore dark clothing. Rain fell across their face. They weren't knocking. They weren't trying to get inside. They weren't moving at all. They were simply staring into the classroom. For several seconds, Chloe couldn't look away. Neither could the students around her. Then another student noticed, and another. Within moments, half the class was staring at the same thing. One girl suddenly screamed. The teacher immediately rushed everyone away from the windows. Students crowded into the far corner of the room. Some refused to look back. Others couldn't stop looking. But when the teacher finally glanced outside herself, the figure was gone. Police searched the school grounds during the lockdown. Officers checked nearby buildings. They searched the parking lots, the wooded areas surrounding the campus. Nothing. No suspicious person was found. Even stranger, investigators couldn't find any obvious way someone could have reached the outside of that second-floor window. There was no ladder, no maintenance platform, no nearby tree, no fire escape, nothing. The lockdown ended later that evening. Students went home shaken. Over the next few days, rumors spread throughout the school. Everyone seemed to have a different theory about who or what had been outside the window. Then investigators reviewed the school's security footage. One camera captured a dark figure standing near the edge of the campus around the same time students reported seeing the face. The person appeared to be staring toward the school. A few seconds later, they turned and walked into the woods. But the footage created a new problem. According to the timestamp, the figure never came close to the building. In fact, investigators estimated they were more than 100 yards away from Chloe's classroom. Police were never able to explain how dozens of students described seeing someone directly outside the second-floor window at the exact same time. No one was ever identified. No arrests were made. And more than 20 years later, former students still disagree about what they witnessed that afternoon. But they all remember the same thing. The feeling that someone was standing outside that window, watching them,